There's no denying that natural gas is one of the most vital commodities known to humanity, enabling the advancement of our civilization through reliable baseload power that generates over 20% of global electricity today, along with being one of the most important industrial feedstocks and fertilizer inputs, enabling massive crop yields to feed the billions of humans on Earth. When we flip on a light switch, fire up the stove to prepare a meal, or pick up fresh produce from the grocery store, there's a pretty decent chance natural gas was involved, and without it, sustaining the world's population as it stands today would be virtually impossible. From an environmental standpoint, natural gas doesn't get nearly enough credit for its clean burning characteristics that make it a superior energy source compared to coal or oil. And despite it often being lumped in with those commodities as a fossil fuel, it emits around 50% less CO2 than coal and approximately 25 to 30% less CO2 than oil, making it an important ally in the continued effort to decarbonize energy generation. The goal of net zero carbon emissions is a controversial initiative, and many political leaders have attempted to throw the baby out with the bathwater in painting natural gas as a molecule that needs to be eliminated. No region of the world encapsulates this conundrum greater than Europe, where we will focus our attention in this video. In addition to overzealous ESG mandates and initiatives, the European Union also seems intent on sanctioning and reducing its dependence on Russian-sourced energy, a move that many experts believe is being done far too rapidly before a sufficient alternative source is in place for the region. Consider the following statistics. In 2025, Europe consumed approximately 340 billion cubic meters of natural gas, and roughly 50% of that was imported liquefied natural gas, or LNG. In terms of domestic production, a single country, Norway, accounts for 60% of supply, and those fields are in decline, projected to fall around 20% over the next decade. All of this has led to an incredibly volatile natural gas market in Europe over the past several years, with prices remaining elevated on a fairly consistent basis. As natural gas is a key input for both personal energy consumption and industry, this price volatility has caused tremendous ruin to businesses in the EU and the financial stability of ordinary citizens as they struggle to keep up with energy costs in an already inflationary economic environment. Today, we're going to dive into the problems currently facing Europe when it comes to natural gas and an emerging energy crisis, and what caused them, along with exploring some potential solutions. Can Europe truly become energy independent after decades of reliance on Russia for approximately 50% of their natural gas flows? Or will they now be forced to switch their reliance to the United States and pay elevated prices for LNG shipped across the world? Let's unpack the ever-shifting energy landscape of Europe and see if we can find some shelter from the storms hanging over the region. At the time of this recording, the European Union has hit Russia with 20 sanctions packages, many which involve energy, including natural gas. With all of the political grandstanding and posturing by European leaders against the great Russian threat, you'd be forgiven for not realizing just how integral Russian energy flows have been to Europe historically, along with the partnerships to ensure that energy keeps flowing that were in place prior to the Russia-Ukraine conflict kicking off in 2022. Europe's dependence on Russian natural gas began slowly at first, in the aftermath of World War II, with Soviet exports to Eastern Bloc countries in Europe such as Poland starting in 1946, followed by deals with other Warsaw Pact member states in the 1950s. One of the major breakthroughs in this story came in 1964, when the USSR and Czechoslovakia signed a landmark contract for the Bratstvo, or Brotherhood pipeline, with first deliveries reaching Czechoslovakia in 1967. In 1968, Austria signed a 23-year contract for 142 million cubic meters of Soviet natural gas annually. This was followed by Italy and France also coming on board to sign their own deals in 1969, and in 1970, West Germany signed a major contract, spearheaded by Chancellor Willy Brandt, which saw Germany supply the Soviet Union with high-quality large-diameter pipes and equipment in exchange for natural gas. The first deliveries to West Germany began in 1973 through the expanding Bratstvo pipeline network. Natural gas flowed to West Germany from Siberian and Ukrainian fields, across Czechoslovakia and into the German grid. Volumes expanded steadily throughout the 1970s, sowing the seeds of Soviet energy dependence for Europe that exploded with a major expansion to the network. The Urengoy-Pomary-Ozgorod pipeline, dubbed the Yamal pipeline by Western media, began construction in 1982, stretching 2,765 miles from the Urengoy gas field in western Siberia across Ukraine and all the way to Central and Western European grids, allowing greater deliveries of approximately 32 billion cubic meters per year to Austria, Germany, France, Italy, and other countries in the region. Of course, with the Cold War well underway between the USSR and the United States, Uncle Sam started to feel threatened by this vast new pipeline network inextricably linking a major adversary to the European economy. And sure enough, President Reagan came out swinging with sanctions targeted at stopping completion of construction. These sanctions covered not only US oil and gas technology exports, but also European subsidiaries that were using licensed US components. In a move that would probably seem exceptional in today's geopolitical environment, Europe defied the sanctions, causing Reagan much frustration in a National Security Council meeting where he said, "Those chicken littles in Europe, will they still be chicken littles if we lead and ask them to follow our lead?" Ultimately, although sanctions slowed progress somewhat, the US could not stop completion of the pipeline network in 1984. The Urengoy-Pomary-Ozgorod expansion was an absolute game-changer, transforming the Bratstvo network from a regional Eastern Bloc venture into a monopolistic trans-Siberian lifeline to Europe as a whole. It locked in high-volume, long-term contracts and created essentially irreversible dependence on Soviet pipeline transits, but was a deal too good to pass up for European leadership, as they were able to secure a reliable source of below-market-priced gas while recycling capital through a gas-for-pipes model that saw massive investment in pipeline infrastructure by German, French, and even Japanese banks in exchange for natural gas. By the 2010s, Russian state-run energy giant Gazprom held around 25 to 30% of EU market share, and in 2011, the landmark Nord Stream pipeline was completed. Nord Stream was actually a pair of parallel offshore pipelines running under the Baltic Sea, from Vyborg, Russia to Lubmin, Germany. It was designed to transport Russian natural gas directly to Western Europe, bypassing traditional overland routes through Ukraine and other Eastern European countries, with a combined total annual capacity of 55 billion cubic meters. Like Yamal, it faced political and public scrutiny, but ultimately, this multi-country collaboration between Russia, Finland, Italy, the Netherlands, and France was completed on schedule and resulted in one of the world's longest subsea pipelines at the time. Planning for Nord Stream 2 began in 2015 and was mired in controversy from the start. The stated goal was to double the annual capacity of Nord Stream to meet Europe's growing gas demand, lower prices, and support Germany's transition away from coal and nuclear power. Opposition to the project was led by the United States, Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states, who believed it would further deepen Europe's dependence on Russian energy while removing the potential for billions of dollars in transit revenues for Ukraine, and provide the Kremlin with an incredibly efficient tool to gain dominance over Western powers. Into a storm of international condemnation, Nord Stream 2 construction commenced in 2018, as US President Donald Trump repeatedly attacked the project in the media, calling Germany totally controlled by Russia, while then German Chancellor Angela Merkel defended the pipeline as essential for the nation's energy security. Russia's President Putin framed Nord Stream 2 as a win-win endeavor that ensured prosperity for both Russia and Germany and heralded it as a deal rooted in decades of energy cooperation between the two nations. As with Reagan and Nord Stream 1, the Trump administration decided to wield sanctions against the project, And in 2019, Congress passed the Protecting Europe's Energy Security Act, imposing sanctions on foreign firms involved in the construction of Nord Stream 2. This delayed the project, causing accusations of illegal interference by both Russia and Germany, but a waiver was ultimately granted under President Biden in exchange for a $1 billion pledge from Germany to support green energy in Ukraine and a guarantee that Russian gas would transit through the country beyond 2024. Of course, that promise didn't need to be kept in the aftermath of what was to come next. February 24th, 2022 was a day that will forever be remembered in history, as it was the day Russia either invaded Ukraine or began their special military operation there, depending on which side's media spin you ascribe to. The reasons for the conflict are multifaceted and outside the scope of this video, but they triggered an immediate response from the European Union and their allies, with sanctions targeting Russian banks, tech exports, and individuals viewed as Russian oligarchs, along with broader economic measures aimed at curbing military support. The most aggressive and unprecedented of these sanctions was the freezing of Russia's foreign exchange reserves to the tune of roughly $300 billion. Russia responded by launching Decree 172, demanding rubles in payment for natural gas contracts with EU member states and other unfriendly nations, overriding existing euro and US dollar contracts in place. It also required payment to be made through Russian banks, with mandates for all customers from so-called unfriendly countries to open special accounts for the purpose of settlement. Poland and Bulgaria were the first to fail to comply within the given deadline and had their gas deliveries halted in April of 2022 as a result. Over the course of 2022, Russia halted all gas deliveries through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline network to Germany, in addition to shutting off transit through the Yamal pipeline network to Europe, and approximately 50% of gas flows through the Bratstvo and Soyuz pipelines via Ukraine to Central and Southern Europe were also halted. In September of 2022, both Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged and effectively destroyed, eliminating the possibility of them being turned back on in a reasonable time frame, cutting off Europe from being able to renegotiate gas deliveries just as their energy costs were skyrocketing. Overall, year over year, 2022 saw gas deliveries from Russia to Europe drop an eye-watering 55 to 60%, the largest decline in modern history. Market prices for natural gas responded violently to the start of the conflict, and subsequent reductions in gas flows from Russia kept up the pressure, with European benchmark pricing climbing rapidly throughout the year and peaking at €345 per megawatt hour, over 10 times pre-conflict averages. Although natural gas is regionally priced, this supply shortage and subsequent price hike caused a ripple through the global economy and drove demand for liquefied natural gas, a form of the molecule that can be transported by ship overseas, to new all-time highs as well. This resulted in developing economies in Asia being outbid for LNG by a desperate Europe, leading many of those countries to switch over to burning coal, an energy source that was much more readily available at a more reasonable cost. Ultimately, all of this tightness in natural gas markets caused the price of electricity for citizens in most European countries to rise dramatically. The European Union launched several initiatives to try and stem the bleeding, starting with the Repower EU plan, which involved increasing LNG imports from the US, Norway, Qatar, Algeria, and other non-Russian sources, boosting domestic biomethane and renewable hydrogen production, and fast-tracking new LNG infrastructure and renewable energy projects in Europe. The EU also implemented minimum gas storage mandates for member states, encouraged reduced energy consumption, developed a platform for joint gas purchasing to secure better pricing, and engaged in direct intervention in the market, including a revenue cap on certain electricity producers, along with an excess profit windfall tax to redistribute that profit to energy bill relief. Despite all of these measures, the loss of affordable natural gas flows from Russia dealt a devastating blow to Europe's economy and the lives of its citizens. Here are some facts that paint a grim picture of the overall effects. The share of the EU population unable to keep their homes adequately warm rose sharply from a pre-crisis low of 6.9% in 2021 to 9.3% in 2022 and peaked at 10.6% in 2023. Total household energy costs rose approximately 62 to 113%, contributing to a 2.7 to 4.8% overall increase in household expenditures. Euro area industrial production in energy-intensive sectors fell by around 15% in aggregate between 2022 and 2024. Firms substituted expensive domestic output with cheaper imports from less energy-exposed countries, hollowing out the domestic manufacturing industry. Energy contributed 3.2 to 3.8 percentage points to euro area headline inflation in 2022, eroding real wages and consumption. In terms of global implications, an estimated 78 to 140 million people around the world were pushed into extreme poverty due to secondary effects. In addition, debt and deficits in the EU were drastically inflated. Energy import bills soared, supply chains were disrupted, and investment in the region was curbed. All these effects described have not gone away, although many have abated to some degree, and the deindustrialization of countries like Germany continues to advance at an alarming pace. To make matters worse, the diversification of energy sources, which involved a greater reliance on Middle Eastern deliveries, was also tragically disrupted in 2026. Global conflict and energy crises seem to go hand in hand, and after the shock experienced in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine, few could foresee that yet another war, this time in the Middle East, would disrupt not only European energy flows once again, but reverberate worldwide. On February 28, 2026, the US and Israel launched nearly 900 strikes on Iran within 12 hours, including decapitation strikes that eliminated Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and several other high-ranking Iranian officials. Attacks also targeted command and control infrastructure, ballistic missile sites, drone facilities, nuclear-related facilities, and radar installations. As with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we won't be focusing on the reasons for the war or who is at fault, but rather on the impacts it has had on European energy markets. In response to these attacks, Iran immediately went on the offensive, sending a barrage of missile and drone strikes at US-allied Gulf states such as Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait, but the greatest weapon they wielded was not ballistic, but economic: the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, where approximately 20% of the world's oil and 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas transits through. To make matters worse, major Qatari gas producer Qatar Energy declared force majeure on all LNG contracts and halted production at their Ras Laffan and Mesaid locations, effectively taking 20% of global LNG off the market. The effects on Europe were immediate. Italy was hit hardest, losing roughly 30% of its LNG flows, and the approximately 14% of the EU's LNG supplies from the Middle East were reduced to a trickle. Electricity prices across Europe shot up, rising over 19% in the UK, over 13% in Italy, and over 7% in Germany, to name a few examples. The crisis deepened as Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field, causing Iran to respond with a missile attack on Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, the largest LNG hub in the world, along with launching strikes on other critical energy infrastructure in the Gulf. This resulted in 17% of Qatar's LNG capacity being decimated, with estimates for those flows to come back online ranging from 3 to 5 years. Qatar Energy extended force majeure on contracts, and the global LNG shortfall worsened. European natural gas prices responded, soaring up to 35% and reaching the highest levels since late 2022 in the aftermath of disruptions triggered by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Power prices once again rose, impacting households in an already depressed industrial sector in Europe. EU policy accelerated in response to the threat of a prolonged energy crisis and involved subsidies, price caps, a push for renewables and nuclear energy, strategic LNG reserves, and possible limited coal restarts to keep costs under control. As it stands today, Europe is not in a favorable position when it comes to energy security, and in regards to natural gas, they have lost around 8% of Qatari flows in the short term, an issue exacerbated by worldwide price contagion, market volatility, and emergency storage refill costs. Policy response halted the worst possible outcomes, but many analysts believe that the EU's unwavering focus on renewable energy as a long-term solution, as opposed to initiatives aimed at encouraging domestic production of clean-burning natural gas, could worsen the problem considerably. If there's a way out of this mess, a balance between transitioning to cleaner energy sources and renewed hydrocarbon production at home could be the key. The EU's ESG framework for reducing dependence on not only Russian and Middle Eastern natural gas flows, but on hydrocarbons across the board, is seen by many as a politically motivated move, as opposed to a well-thought-out long-term strategy with the interests of European citizens and industry at its core. In fact, the EU's constant prioritization of renewable energy over fossil fuels may have only accelerated and deepened the crises presented by both the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the war in Iran. Some would argue that if Europe had been focusing on incentivizing and encouraging domestic natural gas production, as opposed to punishing companies who wanted to engage in such endeavors through sustainable finance regulations, they wouldn't be in this unenviable position to begin with. The counterproductive policies implemented by EU regulators is an extraordinarily long list, and includes the aforementioned outbidding of poorer nations for LNG in the aftermath of Russia-Ukraine, forcing those countries to switch to burning coal, the absolute insane shuttering of nuclear power plants in Germany, and subsequent ramp-up in lignite coal, the dirtiest coal there is, in a desperate bid to stop energy prices from skyrocketing. The massive subsidized build-outs of wind and solar energy in regions without adequate weather conditions to make those projects economically viable, and the list goes on. But with all this criticism out of the way, what is the solution? Europe needs more domestically sourced natural gas, plain and simple. Why rely on energy from unfriendly nations or fragile supply chains based in regions outside your control, all while pounding the pulpit about being carbon neutral, when you can produce the cleanest form of hydrocarbon-based energy in your own territory and ensure it's extracted in the least environmentally harmful way possible? At present, the largest natural gas producing region in Europe is the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, a global super basin discovered in the early 1970s. With approximately 97 offshore fields active and set to produce an estimated 123 billion cubic meters of gas in 2026. Although the mature North Sea is in long-term decline, as mentioned at the top of the show, the United Kingdom sector of the North Sea, producing 30 to 38 BCM at present, is also subject to prohibitive energy policy. Other notable gas-producing countries in Europe include legacy fields in the Netherlands, Ukraine, with significant curtailment due to infrastructure damage associated with the war, and Romania, which is expected to ramp up production as Neptune Deep, the largest upcoming offshore gas project in Europe, advances towards production. Hungary also has significant natural gas potential with supportive fiscal and regulatory terms, and Can-Cambria's Kiskunhalis tight gas project is targeted for production there in early 2027. The project stands out as an advanced, strategically positioned asset in Hungary's Pannonian Basin, implementing North American-style, unconventional industry technology and best practices applied to a proven but underdeveloped legacy discovery. With independently verified contingent resources exceeding 16 billion cubic meters, which could rise to over 31 BCM if further exploration discoveries are confirmed, Kiskunhalis is located in the heart of Central Europe and adjacent to established pipeline infrastructure, ready to serve both Hungary and the wider EU region with a sorely needed domestic source of natural gas. Aside from Cambria, emerging natural gas players in Europe remain scarce, but include Vermilion Energy in Germany, with their Wisselshorst project targeted for first production mid-2026. The potential expansion of Eni and Shell's Val d'Agri and Tempo Rossa projects in Italy, OMV Petrom and NewMed Energy's offshore exploration drilling program in Bulgaria's Han Aspera block, and ADX Energy's small-scale shallow gas drilling campaign in Austria. Overall, the prospective new natural gas production coming online in Europe is incredibly small, making Hungary's Kiskunhalas project and Germany's Wisselshorst project stand out in a tiny crowd, but they are a good start to what will hopefully be a trend of domestic European producers entering the market to supply much-needed energy flows to an empire fighting to remain economically relevant in an ever-shifting geopolitical landscape. Ultimately, decarbonization and clean energy goals do not need to be abandoned, but rather approached with more rational policies that carefully consider economic, societal, and environmental costs and benefits without resorting to emotionally charged political rhetoric. There is a balance that can be achieved between green energy ambitions and fossil fuel realities, and with energy security proving to be more vital than ever in the face of supply chain disruptions and expanding global conflict, here's hoping that Europe will achieve energy independence and rebuild its economy to once again be a contender on the global stage.